these weren't supposed to be people I killed.
What happened? We have units around. What happened?
These were people that had nothing to do with people hiring me to do stuff.
For the Motel 6, was that supposed to happen, or?
No, she struck me. If she
that
hadn't
was just-
struck, that's it. I don't like being hit. Actually, I'm really surprised. I know why I ain't go off when y'all officers threw me down, because that's really one of my pets. I don't like people striking me or pushing me.
It's a Friday night in Hammond, Indiana. The neon sign of a Motel 6 flickers above a parking lot half filled with cars, the highway just behind the fence. Inside one of the rooms, the TV is still on. The air is heavy, the bathroom door half closed, the tub filled with water that has long gone cold. When police step through the doorway, they find 19-year-old Afrikka Hardy, strangled, lying in the bathtub. Her phone is gone, her friends have been frantically trying to reach her, and now, this is where the trail ends. This is the murder that will unravel a hidden pattern in Northwest Indiana and lead detectives through abandoned houses, forgotten neighborhoods, and into the life of a man who says he has killed far more than anyone ever charged him with. This case we'll call The Houses He Knew, the story of a serial killer, Deon Vann, the women whose lives he took, and a city struggling with what was happening in plain sight. To understand this story, you have to picture Gary, Indiana. Once, it was a booming steel town on the shore of Lake Michigan, an industrial engine that drew families from across the country. Over time, as steel jobs vanished and investment dried up, Gary was left with population loss, poverty, and thousands of empty, decaying houses. These abandoned buildings were more than just an eyesore. They became places where people could disappear, places where a man like Darren could operate quietly, take women into the shells of former homes, and walk away with almost no one watching. On October 17, 2014, Afrikka Hardy was just starting a new chapter. 19 years old, she had moved to the Chicago area from Colorado, and she was working through an escort service that arranged meetings by phone and text. That night, a man booked her through the service. He wanted to meet at the Motel 6 in Hammond. The messages were routine time, room number, a confirmation. To Afrikka and to the people who cared about her, this was supposed to be just another appointment. But then the text stopped. Calls went unanswered. The agency and her friends grew worried quickly because that silence was unusual. They reached out to the motel, asking someone to check on her. When the door finally opened, officers found Afrikka's body in the bathroom. The scene was violent. She had been strangled. Her phone, the one that held the details of the client who booked her, was missing. In modern investigations, phones are often the first map. Detectives pulled Afrikka's phone records and message logs from the escort service. They traced the communications that set up the Motel 6 meeting and started following the digital trail. Investigators reported, "We looked at who contacted her, what numbers were calling and texting. One of those contacts stood out. Someone who had just booked her. Someone whose story didn't line up once we dug a little deeper." That contact led them to a 43-year-old man in nearby Gary, Indiana, a registered sex offender named Deon Vann. Detectives moved quickly. Within a day of Afrikka's body being found, they brought Vann into custody. What they expected was a suspect in a single murder. What they got was something else entirely.
Hammond
He
police
claimed there are
captured
more.
a murderer from Gary that is a suspect in at least 7 homicides spanning many years in Northwest Indiana.
2 female adults were involved in a pay-for-service prostitution scheme that was being advertised on ChicagoBackpage.com. An arranged meeting then took place at the Motel 6 involving Hammond victim number 1, identified as Afrikka Hardy, age 19, and the current suspect, a 43-year-old resident of Gary by the name of Darren Vann, spelled V-A-N-N.
In the interrogation room, Vann was described as quiet, controlled, and matter-of-fact. After questioning, he admitted involvement in Afrikka Hardy's killing. And then, almost as if it had been waiting just behind his teeth, something else came out. He told investigators there were other victims. He told them he could show them where the bodies were.
I'm not sure. I just know, you ever walk and you know how to cut through all your trails? And I know the trails is cut through, I cut through the alley that go through another abandoned house to get to this house. Does that make sense?
Sure.
It's like a bunch of abandoned houses.
Mhm.
Right.
A detective reported, "We had a man in front of us who wasn't just admitting to one homicide. He was calmly, almost casually explaining there were more women and that their bodies were in abandoned houses around Gary." For law enforcement, it was a chilling moment. For families of missing women, many of them marginalized, some involved in sex work, others struggling with addiction, it was the moment their worst fears began to harden into reality. Over the next days, Vann led police to a series of abandoned houses in Gary. These were structures many residents passed every day. Boarded windows, peeling paint, sagging roofs. Inside, in the dark, officers found the remains of women in varying states of decomposition. 7 women, including Afrikka Hardy, who'd ultimately been linked to him in charges and convictions. Their bodies were discovered in 5 abandoned buildings and the motel room in Hammond. Their deaths formed a pattern of strangulation and disposal that had gone unnoticed for months. In the days that followed, police tape and flashing lights transformed these forgotten addresses into crime scenes. For each building, there was a family waiting on the other end of the phone, hoping for good news and bracing for the worst. The public often remembers serial killers by name, but the story belongs to the women whose lives were taken. Among the 7 victims, the one Vann ultimately pleaded guilty to killing was Afrikka. There were also women from Gary and surrounding communities, many dealing with economic hardship, some involved in sex work or struggling with addiction. The common thread is not their vulnerabilities, it is that each of them had a life, a family, and a future that ended in violence. One of Afrikka's family members said she was more than how they talked about her on the news. She laughed loud. She loved music. She called us just to tell us small things. That's what we lost, not just a name on a list.
She just wanted to touch people. She wanted to help people. And I guess she has now.
When cases involve marginalized women, especially those who sell sex or live at the edge of economical survival, disappearances can become harder to track and patterns can take longer to see. That delay can cost lives. The case stirred debate about capital punishment, about resources, and about whether a lengthy and emotionally taxing trial would better serve the families than a guaranteed life sentence. In May 2018, Vann chose to plead guilty to 7 murders. Under the terms of his plea deal, the death penalty was taken off the table. On May 25, 2018, the judge sentenced him life in prison, 7 times over. No chance of ever getting out. For many, it was the closest they were going to get to closure. For some families and investigators, the case did not end with that sentencing. In later records and audio obtained by journalists through public records request, Vann claimed he had killed many more women than the 7 named in court. He suggested that his crimes stretched beyond Indiana, into Chicago, and even into states including California, North Carolina, Texas, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Michigan. At this point, authorities have not publicly attributed a confirmed larger number of murders to Vann beyond the 7 in his convictions. The possibility of other victims hangs over the case, a reminder that in the gaps of record keeping and jurisdictional boundaries, some stories may never be fully told. Today, Darren Deon Vann is serving life in prison, with no possibility of parole. His days are confined to a cell, his movements controlled by the state. For all the attention his crimes received at the time of his arrest and conviction, his life now is largely invisible. But the impact of what he has done is not. It lives on in the families of the women he killed, and possibly in the lives of families who may never know whether he was involved in their loved ones' disappearances. It lives on in the way Gary and the wider region talk about abandoned houses, about missing people, and about whose safety matters. In a city of empty houses, a man like Darren Vann was able to move through the cracks. The same economic and social forces that left buildings to rot also left certain people less protected, less believed, and easier to overlook when they vanished. The lesson in this story is not that evil lurks in every vacant home. It is that when communities are allowed to decay, when certain lives are considered less urgent, the conditions are created where a serial predator can hide in plain sight. This video is for Afrikka Hardy and for the other women whose lives ended in those houses and that motel room. It is for the families who have had to search, to wait, and to sit in courtrooms listening to the details of their loved ones' final moments. From the Crime Drop, this has been The Houses He Knew. Thank you for listening, and as always, guys, stay safe.